90 minutes before President Trump's deadline to bomb Iran into an oblivion, a ceasefire was announced. The Strait of Hormuz would reopen. Safe passage guaranteed. Oil prices plunged 13% in a single session, biggest one-day drop since April 2020. And then within hours, it can fall apart. But here's the part nobody's talking about. The ceasefire wasn't really brokered by Pakistan, though they got the credit. It was China operating from the shadows, using economic leverage with Iran that Western nations don't have, protecting its own energy lifeline. 45% of China's oil flows through that strait, and the ceasefire, three contradictions in 24 hours, destroyed it. Pakistan, the official mediator, said the ceasefire covers everywhere, including Lebanon. Netanyahu said it does not include Lebanon and promptly bombed 100 Hezbollah targets in 10 minutes. Iran's parliamentary committee said all plans to open Hormuz must cease until Lebanon is included. Three parties, three different understandings of what they agreed to. Iran chose Hezbollah solidarity over Hormuz revenue. The deal's architect, its beneficiary, and its signatory all disagreed on the text. And now, 800 ships, yes, 800 ships are still trapped, still waiting, still burning money. This is the largest logistics energy supply disruption in history. The head of the International Energy Agency said, and I quote, more serious the ones in 1973, 1979, and 2002 together. We are going to break down exactly what that means through the energy trilemma lens: security, affordability, and sustainability. But also the hidden geopolitics, China's quiet ascent as a global mediator, the divergence between paper and oil markets, and some physical manufacturing aspects, and why this crisis, even if it ends tomorrow, has already reshaped global energy for years to come. I'm your host at Trilemma Energy. Let's get into it. China's shadow play. Before we get into the numbers and the timeline again, you need to understand the most important story that's not being told loudly enough. China just pulled one of the most calculated geopolitical plays in recent history. And they did it so quietly, sophisticatedly, that most of the people think Pakistan deserves the credit. It may so. Here's what happened behind the scenes. I'll share with you. China's unique leverage. Beijing has something Western nations don't have. Deep, long-term economic and strategic ties with Iran. Oil trade. Belt and Road investments, financial lifelines when Iran was under maximum pressure since sanctions. When the US threatens Iran, has limited option. When China calls Tehran, Tehran listens. And China's motivation wasn't altruism. It was a pure self-interest. Energy security. 45% of China's oil, as I said, imports flow through Strait of Hormuz. A full-blown war, a sustained closure that an existential threat to Chinese economy. Industrial production, transportation, petrochemicals, everything downstream of a crude oil. So when strikes intensified and it looked like we were heading for a prolonged conflict, Beijing moved, and quiet diplomacy through intermediaries. China didn't act publicly. No press conferences, no grand announcement. Instead, they used diplomatic back channels and intermediaries like Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt. These nations passed messages, reduced misunderstandings, facilitated the actual negotiations while China remained in the background pulling strings. Trump even acknowledged it. He said, I'm paraphrasing that amount for you. He believes China helped bring Iran to the negotiation table. That's rare. Trump giving China credit for anything. We would look into the United Nations veto play. And here's the most calculated move. During the peak of the crisis, China and Russia blocked United Nations resolution regarding the Strait of Hormuz. The Western powers wanted a resolution condemning Iran, pressuring them to reopen the strait. China's representative at UN argued the resolution was unbalanced, ignored root cause, unfairly targeted Iran, vetoed, blocked. On the surface, that looked like China backing Iran. But think deeper. That veto bought crucial time for diplomatic channels to work without backing Iran into corner. If UN resolution was passed, Iran would have been under massive international pressure with no face-saving exit. The veto gave them room to negotiate privately. Classic Chinese strategy. Block public pressure, enable private diplomacy. Claim you're working tirelessly for peace. Get the outcome that you want. Strait reopens. Your oil flows without being seen as an either pro-American or pro-Iranian. Public stance and messaging. China's foreign ministry hasn't explicitly taken credit for the ceasefire, but Chinese officials and embassies released carefully worded statement calling for all parties to end the war, emphasizing their tireless work for peace. Subtle, claim credit without claiming the credit. Positioning as a global mediator. And here's the bigger picture that I literally was shocked to see. This is China's positioning itself as a powerful global mediator capable enough of resolving crisis where the US struggles. US bombed Iran, killed the supreme leader, but couldn't broker peace. China, through quietly leverage and economic ties, got both sides to the table. It's a message to the global south, I would say, to energy importing nations also. Anyone watching, rather simple. American military might is limited. China's economic leverage gets results, whether the ceasefire holds or not. And a spoiler, it's already falling apart, by the way. China won the optics. They protected their energy interests. They didn't fire a shot. They didn't spend billions on career strike group. They just made few phone calls, blocked one UN resolution, and used the leverage they used to build over years for economic engagement with Iran. That's the geopolitical backdrop for today. Now, let's get into what actually happened on the ground in the markets and on those 800 trapped ships which I mentioned earlier. That's the number I would say that matters, okay? Let's start with the data I would like to spread across, because if you want to understand what's actually happening, we have to look at the numbers, and some of these numbers are absolutely wild. As of April 8th, 1800 hours, Gulf time, crude oil Brent was $94.16 per barrel. That's down 13% from a peak of $119 to $116 just 24 hours earlier. 24 hours when the ceasefire was announced, but still it's still up 70% from where we started in late February when this whole thing kicked off. 70%. in 6 weeks. That's too much. WTI is somewhere around $94.62. Same story. Peaked near 116, crashed on ceasefire hopes, still massively elevated from the pre-crisis level. Now, here I want to talk about, here's what's wild. Those are paper prices. Financial instruments trade on exchange, physical markets, actual barrels being loaded onto actual ships is even more extreme. Saudi Aramco just set its official selling price for Arab light crude to Asia at $19.50 premium above the Oman Dubai benchmark. 1950. A month ago, that premium was 250. That's not a price increase. That's a scarcity signaling screaming at you. The polymer story, nobody's covering. And here's where it gets really interesting. Crude crash. In crude crash, 13% on a ceasefire news. Great. It's amazing story, right? Futures traders are happy, but polymers, the plastics in our phone, in our packaging, in our car dashboards, they are up 35 to 70%. 35 to 70%. Why? 31 active force majeure declaration across the globe, polymer supply chain. Asian naphtha crackers, the facilities that turn crude into building blocks for plastics, running at 70% utilization because they are starved of a feedstock. They need physical delivery of crude. Paper market optimism doesn't help them. They need physical product. Now, Dow Chemical just doubled its price, increased to 30 cents per pound. That's a $660 per ton. And here's the India angle. Over 50% of India's plastic small and medium enterprise have shut down because domestic polymer prices spiked 80%. 80. Oil futures trade on forward-looking expectations. Maybe a deal or no deal, but they are optimistic. But petrochemical complexes need actual molecules deliver to their plants. The paper markets celebrated the ceasefire. Physical manufacturing across the globe is still in crisis in limbo. Now, LNG and natural gas. Asia's Japan-Korea markers benchmark hit 2540 per million BTU at the peak. That's up 68% in a single day. When Qatar declared force majeure after drone strikes, it's since pulled back to around $15 on a ceasefire hope, but that's still double pre-crisis level, double the pre-crisis level. Europe's TTF nearly doubled from 30 euros per megawatt hour to 60. We have already said in the past on our channels, Goldman Sachs said if Hormuz stays closed, we are looking at 85 euros, the level that triggered massive demand destruction in 2022 energy crisis. But here's the reality check. Europe's gas storage is at 28.20% full. So now 28.2. So Germany, the numbers, France, all these numbers are critically low. The EU mandate is to hit 90% before winter or face rationing. If we see the shipping domain, if we talk about like ULCC or VLCC tanker, VLCC tankers, VLCC tanker rates on the Middle East Gulf to China route, these specific vessels, Kalamos was just chartered at $770,000 per day. $775,000 per day, that's a historic record of chartering. 5-year-old VLCC are selling for $120 million plus, up 17% year on year. The shipping VLCC ship prices, every ship stuck at anchor is burning 20 to 30,000 a day, just sitting there. Crew cost, opportunity cost, cargo depreciating. If it is a perishable cargo, then it's depreciating. The ships, themselves more than 800 cargo ships and tankers stuck inside the Persian Gulf, which we already discussed. Normally, daily traffic through Hormuz 135 to 150, sometimes 130, around 1, as I said, that these are the numbers. Current traffic on April 8, which I just checked, was somewhere around 12 on really good day when Iran's feeling cooperative. Inventories and the reserve illusions, here's the part that's important. The 13% oil price crash looks like a relief, but it's artificial. It's masked by unprecedented strategic reserve released. The US has released 172 million barrels from the strategic petroleum reserve. As we have already discussed on this channel, the IEA coordinated release totaling 400 million barrels globally, the biggest intervention in history. But the problem, the SPR is now severely depleted, half of what was pre-crisis. So we are 50% on SPR right now across the globe. One energy analyst said it perfectly. These interventions provide a vital microeconomic buffer but obscure underlying physical constraints, the physical delivery, physical availability of a product. The price relief is borrowed from the future security. When the next shock hits, hurricane season, another geopolitical flare or whatever, buffer is gone. Or if ceasefire is not working, then what? OPEC Plus announced a 206,000 barrel per day increase for May. Sounds helpful, but 12 to 15 million barrels per day are missing from Hormuz. 206,000 versus 12 to 15 million. It's mathematically irrelevant, and most OPEC Plus members can't physically deliver their quotas by any means right now because of all the crises that have happened. Because loading terminals are damaged or blocked, and there's the India strategic reserve problem, petroleum reserves, right? Only somewhere around 64% filled. 3.37 million metric tons out of 5.3 capacity, 5.33 capacity. That covers less than, say, let's at the better side, 15 to 20 days, right? Pathetically low for a country. This depend on imports, right? Diesel and gas oil floating on tankers globally. 205 million barrels, up 12% in 2 weeks. Why? Because those tankers can't get to their destinations. The fuel is there. It's stuck. So that's the snapshot. Paper prices crashed on ceasefire hopes. Physical markets are still in big chaos. Polymers spiked while crude fell. This is flip-flop story. Shipping cost at a record high. Strategic reserves depleted. And 800 ships waiting for clarity that isn't coming. So I would like to let's change some topic here. Let's get how we reached here, just to get some rewind, right? Because this didn't started just 6 weeks ago, I would say. It's not February, it doesn't started and all that. It started long back. It's been building for years. 2025, like 12-day air conflict that happened between US, Israel and Iran didn't escalate fully, but it set the stage. Nuclear negotiations in Geneva collapsed. Iran signaled that the Strait of Hormuz was on the table as a leverage. That was the point. Iran specifically pointed out that. Mid-February 2026, Iran ramps up oil export to 3 times normal levels. Strategic repositioning. They knew something was coming, so they were aware about it. China was likely already in back channels urging caution, protecting its supply lines. February 28, Operation Epic Fury, the US and Israel launched coordinated airstrike targeting Iranian military facilities, nuclear sites and leadership, wherein a fatal accident or incident happened and Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. This isn't a warning shot. This is a regime level targeting. Iran's response was immediate and it was massive. Missiles, drones attacks and across the US bases in Middle East Gulf. Strikes on Israeli territory also. Strikes on Gulf allies, Saudi refineries, especially energy infrastructure, Saudi refineries, Qatari LNG facilities, and then the big one, March 2nd, a senior official in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard officially confirms the Strait of Hormuz is closed. Any ship that attempted passage will be attacked. US flagged tanker Stena Imperative is hit twice at Bahrain. One port worker was killed. By midnight, no tankers were broadcasting automatic identification system signals in the strait. Zero traffic. Everybody switched off their channels. China's nightmare scenario was unfolding at that time. March 3rd, Qatar Energy declares force majeure on all LNG contracts. The world's second largest LNG exporter just went offline. Europe, which gets 12 to 14% of its LNG from Qatar, is staring at another energy crisis. Asian buyers, Japan, Korea, India, China, were scrambling. China starts quiet outreach to Tehran through trusted intermediaries. March 18, Iranian missiles hit Qatar, Ras Laffan Industry City. The LNG complex, 17% reduction in Qatar's production capacity, and Qatar Energy says it will take 3 to 5 years to repair. 3 to 5 years. This isn't a short-term disruption anymore. This is the structural damage to global LNG supply that no ceasefire can fix quickly. Throughout March, the chess game went on and on. Iran sets up a selective permission system. Chinese owned vessels pass through relatively smoothly. Beijing's leverage started appearing. It started working. India negotiates bilateral deals. Pakistan gets permission for specific shipments. Malaysia secures transit rights. Everyone else waiting, negotiating, paying. One ship reportedly paid $2 million just to use Iran's northern channel. A new route they set up near Lark Island to bypass the main channel. $2 million for safe passage through 21 nautical miles of water. 21 nautical miles. And here's the bizarre twist. These are the stories that have been shared with me by some of my sources. Iran's now talking about charging a $1 cryptocurrency toll, Bitcoin payments, cargo manifest submitted to Iran authorities preemptively. The Tehran toll booth that people are talking about, some ships pay, some negotiate diplomatic access, some wait indefinitely. It creates a two-tier system that generates revenue for Iran while maintaining leverage. Alternative routes get activated. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline pumps more crude to Red Sea at the port of Yanbu. The UAE's Habshan Fujairah pipeline does the same. But combined capacity is maybe 3 million barrels a day. We are missing 10 to 15 million. Oman's port, Duqm, Salalah, Sohar become critical bypass hubs. But the Iran hits Duqm and Salalah with drones, fuel storage tanks damaged. The Joint War Committee of London Insurance Market adds Omani waters to high risk list. So here comes the insurance factor. Insurance premiums spiked from 0.25% of a vessel value to 3% for a $100 million LNG carrier. That's going from 250,000 to 3 million per voyage, per trip. India and Pakistan deployed destroyers to the Gulf of Oman to escort commercial ships, not in the strait itself, that's too hot, but just outside. 7 to 8 destroyers can escort 3 to 4 ships per day. At that rate, clearing the backlog would take 200 days, which is current backlog. By early April, it's clear this isn't sustainable. Prices are spiking. China's economy is feeling the squeeze. Beijing intensifies diplomatic efforts through Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, and messages starts flowing. Concessions are explored. Trump is willing to talk. He said so publicly, unusual for him. So I'm repeating this entire history, backtracking, so that you are there. You can visualize what might come in the future. Now, April 7th, Trump sets a hard deadline. 8 p.m. Eastern Time, reopen the strait or face devastating strikes on the infrastructure. He specifically threatens every bridge and power plant in Iran. Quote, a whole civilization could die tonight. China accelerates. Last minute calls to Tehran, economic incentives, security guarantees, messages through Pakistan to the US. 90 minutes, just 90 minutes before the deadline, the ceasefire is announced. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Iran agrees to reopen passage if all attacks halt. Israel reportedly agrees. Pakistan gets public credit as a mediator. China stays in the shadows, preferred position. And then Israel strikes on Lebanon. 100 Hezbollah targets in 10 minutes. Netanyahu's position, the ceasefire doesn't cover Lebanon. Iran immediately halts tanker passage again. Now, the Parliament Committee of Iran positions either ceasefire everywhere or ceasefire nowhere. A chance of deal collapsed within hours because the text was deliberately ambiguous. Pakistan said Lebanon was covered. Netanyahu said it wasn't. Iran chose solidarity with Hezbollah over Hormuz revenue. And China's carefully brokered peace can fall apart. That's how we got here. 40 days of escalation, China's quiet mediation maneuvering a ceasefire with fatal contradictions. And now 800 ships still trapped while Beijing recalculates its next silent shadow move. Now 800 ships, I am being repeating. Let me clarify that logjam for you. The 800 ship logjam and the new crypto toll booth possibly. So let's talk about these 800 ships, because this isn't just an inconvenience. This is logistics nightmare with cascading domino effect across the global economy. And now there's a cryptocurrency element that sounds like something out of a cyberpunk novel. First, what kind of ships are we talking about? VLCCs and ULCCs very specifically. VLCCs are very large crude carriers and ULCCs are ultra large crude carriers. They're super tankers in simple sense. 2 million barrels of crude capacity worth $100 million or more each, burning $20,000 to $30,000 a day just sitting at an anchor. Crew stuck on board. Food, supplies, replenishment, stevedores, so many things pending. That Kalamos I mentioned, 770,000 per day when it's actually chartered, sitting idle is financial hammer hanging. LNG carriers, super cooled cargo at minus 162 Celsius. It's boiling off continuously, so you lose cargo every day even if you're not moving. If you're stuck too long, you have to vent to avoid pressure buildup. That's literally burning money and emitting methane, which is 80 plus times worse than carbon dioxide for a climate warning over 20 years. Bulk carriers, grain fertilizer, steel, chemical, so many different aspects. The Arabian Gulf accounts for 20% of global seaborne fertilizer exports. This is also we have discussed in past. 46% of global urea trade. India imports 18% of its urea from the Gulf. Brazil 10%. China 8%. Spring planting season is already happening right now. Farmers are really panicked. They are doing a panic buying or switching to inferior alternatives. Container ships, electronics, textile, machinery, delays, all these things are compounding. Ports in UAE, Khor Fakkan. I spoke to one of my friend on his 800 containers are sitting idle there are congested because ships that would normally transit Hormuz are diverting there instead. And the human cost, crew rotations. These sailors signed on for specific tours. Many are now weeks past scheduled relief. Mental health issues, physical health deteriorating, any events, family issues, or labor laws in multiple jurisdictions are being stressed. 15,000 cruise ship passengers stranded on 6 ships. Yes, you haven't heard that. I was shocked to read this when I prepared this report for you. 28 Indian flagged vessels with 778 Indian seafarers on board. These are people, not just terroristic. Why can't they just leave? 3 reasons. But now there's a fourth, the crypto toll. So I think the Bitcoin might have started spiking again. 1. Iran's permission. That is, Iran's permission system is opaque and arbitrary. That's what some sources say. They have said they will allow passage for certain ships under certain conditions. Chinese owned generally get through. Beijing's leverage. Muslim owned and Turkish operated heavy have already succeeded in trespassing. But the criteria aren't public, neither published. There's a non-transparent application process. Ship owners negotiate one-off deals through back channels. 2. The Tehran toll booth, and here's the new wrinkle. Iran is reportedly implementing a $1 cryptocurrency toll, Bitcoin payments for passage rights. Ships have to submit cargo manifestation to Iran authorities. Pay in Bitcoin, get permission, maybe. It's brilliant from Iran's perspective. Cryptocurrency transaction bypass the traditional banking, SWIFT sanctions, other sanctions which are already there. It creates revenue, it maintains control, and that data collection, knowing exactly what every ship is carrying, where, how, and everything else, where it is going, and that intelligence is gold. For ship owners, it's a bizarre choice. Pay a token amount in Bitcoin to a regime and hope they honor the deal, or wait indefinitely. Third factor is of insurance. Even if Iran says you can go and you have paid the Bitcoin toll, your insurer might say you can't. War risk premiums went from 0.25% to 3%. But some insurers are just cancelling coverage entirely for the Gulf. They have stopped giving coverage over those vessels. So no coverage means no passage. Period. Lloyd's of London syndicates, the Joint War Committee, standard P&I clubs, they are pulling back, and insurers can effectively shut a shipping lane even if it's physically open. They did it in the Red Sea during the Houthi attacks. They are doing it now. Now, for the fourth factor, it's the military situation is fluid and unpredictable. The ceasefire should be there, but it could collapse completely at any moment. We have already seen in fray, we have already seen in the first 24 hours, if you commit your $200 million LNG carrier to transit and the shooting starts again while you are at the choke point, 21 nautical miles wide, the narrowest, you are sitting duck. Iranian anti-ship missiles, mines, fast attack craft, frigate submarines, the risk calculation doesn't work. It's too high. So ships wait, and while they wait, global supply chains get fractured. Diesel shortages in Southeast Asia, gasoline queues in the Philippines. We have already discussed of all the energy crisis, LPG rationing, food prices spike in Gulf states because 80% of their calories are imported through Hormuz. Egypt threatening military courts for price gouging because Suez revenue is down as ships avoid the entire region. Wood Mackenzie estimates that if this disruption lasts 2 months, Northeast Asian LNG demand will fall by 4 to 5 million tons. Not because people want less gas, because They physically can't get it. Demand destruction through supply failure. Europe emerging from winter with storage at 28.22%, historically catastrophic, is facing a secondary energy crisis. The talk at CERAWeek, which I have already shared with you, was dominated by one question: what happens if Hormuz doesn't reopens by mid of April? And nobody had a good answer. Even IATA's Director General said something sobering: it will take months to normalize fuel. Specifically, he mentioned about jet fuel supplies and prices. Even if Strait remains open, it will take months, not weeks. The damage is structural, the lag is real. So that's the logjam. 800 ships, 4 pathways to maybe getting out: Iranian permission, crypto toll payment, insurance coverage, military de-escalation. Anything reliable out there? And the economic damage compounds every day. So let's speak about energy trilemma. The security is shattered. All right, let's apply the trilemma lens, because this crisis reveals every tension in the global energy system. We all start with security because that's the most direct catastrophic hit. The choke point nightmare is realized 20%, as we already know. So far, you might have heard hundreds and thousands of times. 20% of global oil supply, 56-kilometer wide strait controlled by a hostile actor. We know this for decades. Energy security war games since the 1980s have modeled this exact scenario, and it finally happened. What does security mean here? Supply reliability, predictability, confidence that if you place an order for crude or energy, it actually arrives. Right now, that confidence is shattered. Countries are responding based on their structural exposure and strategic depth. China had 1.2 billion barrels of onshore crude inventory going into this. 5 months of Middle Eastern import needs. They are drawing it down, but that buffer exists. And Beijing's diplomatic leverage with Iran, the back channels, the economic ties, gives them preferential passage rights. Chinese-owned ships are getting through more reliably than Western-flagged vessels. India had much diplomatic coverage. Now let's talk about their strategic reserves. As we have already spoke about, 64% filled, covering less than 15 to 20 days, somewhere around that of demand. So India is also scrambling. We will get into that shortly, but the response is multi-pronged. Bilateral deals with Iran for a passage rights. 90% surge from India's side in Russian imports. Naval destroyers escorting ships. Domestic production ramped up. Rationing implemented. The US released 172 million barrels from the strategic petroleum reserves. Biggest US drawdown in history. The IEA coordinated 400 million barrels globally, but now the SPR is severely depleted for India, IEA, Europe, America. Half of peak crisis level. If another shock hits, hurricane seasons disrupting Gulf of Mexico production, another geopolitical flare-up, the buffer is already gone. Saudi and UAE are using pipelines to pass Hormuz, east-west pipeline, as we already discussed, Habshan, Fujairah. That's a brilliant infrastructure built precisely for this scenario. But the combined capacity is only 3 million barrels, as we said. Saudi produces 10 million, UAE about 4. They are still choking off 7 to 11 million barrels per day because they have nowhere to put it. Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, no pipelines. No pipelines, completely dependent on Hormuz, Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar. Now, Kuwait's Al Salami VLCC got hit by Iranian drone while anchored in Dubai. Fully loaded, fire potential, oil spill, Iraq's exports are almost entirely blocked. Any resumption would primarily benefit China and India, who together absorb 50% of Iraqi crude. But there's no sign of that happening very soon. And then there is a long term structural damage, as we spoke about already today. Qatar's Ras Lafan, that 70% capacity reduction, 3 to 5 years repair. There is not crisis, as I said. It's a permanent shift in global LNG supply. Now you would see different strategies from different countries come across. Europe was banking on Qatar LNG to replace a Russian pipeline gas. That plan just got delayed by half a decade. Japan is 90% dependent on Middle Eastern oil transiting Hormuz. South Korea is somewhere around 70% dependability. Taiwan, even worse. These are advanced economies with no domestic production. Structurally, fully exposed. China's mediation efforts were partly about protecting these East Asian supply lines because disruption in Japan and Korea impacts the entire regional manufacturing ecosystem that China is part of and even depends upon. So, on the security leg of the trilemma, catastrophic and ongoing failure, the choke point risk everyone knew about, and it became a reality. Alternative routes exist but can't substitute at scale. Strategic reserves provided temporary cushion but are now depleted. And even if the ceasefire holds, which I want to, structural damage like Ras Lafan means insecurity persists for years. The only partial winner from my lens is China. Through economic leverage and quiet diplomacy, Beijing secured preferential treatment for its ship while positioning itself as the mediator who can resolve what American military force couldn't. Now, affordability crisis. As I said, paper versus physical. Now let's talk affordability. This is where the crisis hits ordinary people and where the divergence between the financial markets and physical reality becomes a stark clarity. You can very well see that. Paper market story from $73 per barrel in late February to $116 on April 17th. On April 7th. 70% increase, then 13% crash. 94 when the ceasefire was announced. Volatility is insane. So if you are a refiner, a utility, an airline, a shipping company, anyone who uses energy as an input, this volatility is planning nightmare. How much you can hedge? You cannot hedge effectively when the underlying geopolitical risk is binary. So either the strait opens or it doesn't. There's no continuous probability disruption to model. So for consumers, it's already brutal. US gasoline prices went from $3.20 per gallon to over $4. India's cooking gas LPG cylinders became so scarce, the government has to ration supply, manage hoarders. The IEA raised its average Brent forecast for 2026 from $78 to $96. That's the new baseline. 96 is the baseline. We have to get accustomed to energy prices which are in and around us. They noted that peak prices could hit 130 plus in a prolonged closure. Goldman says 135. JP Morgan says 150 is possible if Hormuz logjam, ceasefire doesn't resolve. Some analysts are quietly modeling $200 per barrel if ceasefire is broke. In the US, gasoline would be $6 to $7 per gallon. In India, petrol is already subsidized. Government is paying the brunt, unaffordable for millions. Diesel, which power trucks, agriculture, construction, farm inputs, could potentially explode during planting season. But here's a critical insight that's being missed in most coverage. The 13% oil price crash is artificial. It borrowed relief. 172 million barrels from US SPR, 400 from IEA globally. That coordination, the largest reserve intervention in history. An energy analyst I follow nailed it. These interventions provide a vital, as I said already, microeconomic buffer, but obscure underlying physical constraint. The prices fall because government flooded the market with strategic reserve stocks, but those stocks aren't infinite. The buffer for future shocks is now half of what it was. So the affordability relief is temporary and comes at the cost of future security. Asian countries without strong renewables are being crushed. Philippines declared a state of emergency over fuel shortage. Bangladesh, Pakistan, Vietnam, similar stories. Price sensitive economies. They can't outbid richer buyers and scramble for a limited supply which everybody is competing for. Europe's natural gas doubling to 60 euros per megawatt hours means electricity bills spiking. We have already discussed the similar situation in Germany, in France, across. Now, that brings in the industrial slowdown. Chemical plants, steel mills, energy intensive manufacturing, cutting production or shutting entirely because input cost doesn't work. And it's not just fuels. This is where the physical reality diverges from paper optimism. And the shock spreads. We spoke about the polymer shock. We already covered that in the getting almost zero mainstream coverage. And as I said, it's completely massive. Crude crashed 13%. Oil future traders celebrated. Headlines talked about it, relief. But while crude fell, polymers surged 35 to 70%. 35 to 70, why? Because 31 active force measure declaration are in effect across the global polymer supply. 31. Asian naphtha crackers, the facilities that convert crude oil into ethylene, propylene, the building blocks for plastics are running at 70% utilization. They are starved of feedstock. We can trade oil futures all day, but to make plastic, we need actual crude delivered to an actual petrochemical complex. Paper market optimism doesn't help when the tanker carrying your feedstock is stuck in the Persian Gulf. What we can do? Thank you very much. All manufacturers are being priced out or shut down entirely. Now, India's double play, escorts and hydropower. Let's zoom in on India because India's response to this crisis is fascinating. A real-time masterclass in energy pragmatism combined with long-term strategic positioning. And there's a development from April 8, the same day as the ceasefire, that nobody's connecting to this story. India is the world's third largest oil importer. 5.5 million barrels per day consumption, 85 to 90% imported. Before the crisis, about 45% of imports transits through Hormuz. Massive concentration risk. But crude is only part of the story. The real vulnerability is LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, cooking fuel for 332 million consumers. India imports 60% of its LPG. 90% of those imports normally transit through Hormuz. This isn't just energy security. This is a food security. You can't cook without fuel, right? So when Hormuz closed, India's response was immediate and multi-layered. First, extreme diversification. Russian crude imports surged 90% month on month, from 1 million barrels per day in February to 1.9 million in March. By month end, Russian crude was 46.8% of India's total imports, up from 20%. That's a structural pivot in 30 days. Why Russia? Discounts. Ural crude trades $8 to $12 below Brent because of logistic constraint and sanctions limited buyers. For India, it's an import bill. That's 1.4 to 1.8 billion dollars in annual saving at current run rate. Affordability through opportunism. And here's the geopolitical balancing act. India also resumed buying from Iran. First time since 2019, 7-year hiatus. The US had sanctioned, India complied, but now with Hormuz closed and prices spiking, India got back, likely with a quiet Chinese encouragement through back channels, and started buying Iranian crude again. And the quid pro quo. India expects cooperation from Iran for safe passage of its ships through the strait, energy for access. Bilateral deal. India's also increasing purchase from West Africa, Latin America, anywhere with spare barrels. The Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas said refiners secured supplies from more than 40 countries. 40. That's diversification at emergency scale. Second, naval escorts. That's a real story. One of my sources from Red Sea shared this. So, in media, media stories yesterday, Indian flagged LPG tanker Green Asha, and in March, LPG tankers VWTYR and BWELM, the LPG tankers owned by Chennai-based LPG shipping company BW Global Unit LPG, successfully crossed the Strait of Hormuz near Iran. On Strait story, India deployed destroyers to the Gulf of Oman, not inside Hormuz, as we said, that's too hot, but just outside, escorting Indian flagged tankers and LPG carriers. My source confirmed as of March 11th, 28 Indian flagged vessels operating in the region with 778 Indian seafarers on board. 24-hour monitoring system, direct ship to shore communication, enhanced security procedures. Even Pakistan did the same. Both countries actually coordinated. They're coordinating informally because they have the same problem. When India and Pakistan cooperate on anything, you know the situation is pretty damn serious. Third, the rationing. LPG imports fell 40% in March. LNG fell 92%. 92 Qatar's force majeure obliterated Indian LNG supply. So the government issued a natural gas control order under the Essential Commodities Act, priority allocation pyramid. Households get full supply. Power plants for grid stability get full supply. Industrial users, they got some cut. Domestic LPG production ramped up partially, offset imports, but we can't replace 90% overnight. Commercial and industrial users, hotels, restaurants, factories face restrictions to protect household consumers. Fourth, strategic reserves drawdown. India's SPR only 64% filled. We have discussed this. Not huge, but they are using. Crude stocks released to refineries to cushion their price shock and the cost. The Indian crude basket went from $69 per barrel, $69 per barrel in February to $113 in March. That's a 64% spike for a country importing 5.5 million barrels a day. That's an extra $220 million per day. $220 million per day. 6.6 billion per month. 79 billion annualized. The rupee is under pressure because of all this. Foreign portfolio investors pulling out. Current account deficit widening. BMI research estimates a complete Hormuz closure could directly reduce India's GDP up to 0.5 percentage points. So what India didn't do, the US called for naval coalition to forcibly reopen Hormuz. Trump said countries dependent on the Strait of Hormuz should grab it and cherish it. India said no, we will negotiate bilaterally with Iran. We will escort our ship outside the strait, but we are not joining a US-led military operation. Deliberate choice. Energy pragmatism over ideological alignment, and it is working. Indian ships are getting through on a permission basis more reliably than ships from other countries that joined or supported US position of Gulf region. Now, here's the part nobody's talking about. The same day as the ceasefire, April 8th, 2026, India's cabinet approved 40,000 crore rupees in funding. 40,000 crores, that's $4.8 billion for two massive hydropower projects, Kalai 2, 1,200 megawatts on the Lohit River in Arunachal Pradesh, Kamala, there is 1,720 megawatts on a subsensory tributary. So the combined annual generation is 11,700 million units. And here's the strategic kicker. These projects are in Arunachal Pradesh, near the Chinese border, disputed territory that China claims. This isn't just about energy, it's about sovereignty, infrastructure, strategic depth. Prime Minister Modi's statement boosting clean energy, grid stability, and sustainable development. But let's read between the lines. While India's short-term response is Russian crude discounts and Iranian bilateral deals, the long-term answer is domestic generation, renewables, hydro, nuclear, eventually reducing structural dependence on choke points that can be weaponized. So, the India story has two layers: immediate crisis management, 90% Russian import, Iranian deals, naval escorts, LPG rationing, 41 countries diversification, long-term strategic positioning, nearly $5 billion for hydro infrastructure announced literally the same day as the ceasefire in strategically sensitive border regions. It's a playbook for managing energy insecurity. When you are structurally exposed, diversify sources aggressively, protect your supply lines with naval assets, ration strategically to protect critical consumers, and invest massively in domestic generation to reduce future exposure. But it is also exposed the fundamental vulnerability: 50% of crude, 90% of LPG through one choke point, SPR coverage under 15 to 20 days, every external shock, 99 one Gulf War, 2008 oil spike, 2020 Ukraine. Now this hits the same weak point until the India builds the full stack, massive renewables, nuclear at scale, domestic storage, complete supply diversified. it remains the mercy of that 56-kilometer strait, and the $5 billion hydropower project announcement shows the government knows it. Now, what happens next if we just see and try to understand how this war goes on?